Hi, welcome to another episode of World Beyond Belief. I'm happy that you're here. My name's Paul Marko, and I'll be your host and probably commentator for the rest of the hour. It's good to have you here. Today we're going to talk about the control matrix, and we're going to get deeply into the control matrix and its major elemental components over which you have total control. We're going to also look at it in light of some new information that's coming out about the control matrix. That it's not just a Luciferian, Satanist, Freemason, Jesuit, Knights of Malta, on and on, secret society control matrix. But a big element of it, if maybe not the controlling, overarching element of it, is artificial intelligence. And knowing that it's artificial intelligence gives us a big advantage. And we'll talk about that later in the hour. After we walk through all the components, this is a type of podcast where it's what they call cumulative in education, where you start with a concept and one concept builds upon another one. So I hope you're fastened in. I hope you have your snack tray and you're ready to get into this. We'll start, and I think that you'll be surprised at what you'll learn, especially in the second hour. Okay, so let's get started. Well, we're going to dissect the control matrix. The elemental control mechanism, kind of like the atom or the quark in the control matrix, is a belief. And those beliefs roll up into your ego's belief platform. And it's confusing, but I'll really try to make it clear. Let me talk about mine and how I came into this world and how my beliefs were manipulated and changed as I went through my life. When I came in right after the war and in Pittsburgh, and I was blessed with an amazing grandmother. She was very much of a Christian, but she was very open-minded. She was probably the first person to ever subscribe to Psychology Today. She was amazing. And she would set me on her lap from the time I was 3 or 4, from the time I can remember. And she'd read her Bible, and she'd read the newspaper, and she would talk to me about prophecies and things like that. Now, her God, her Jesus, was very loving. And the rule that her Jesus had was just love everybody the way I love you. That was the main underlying principle of her spirituality, or her religion. I'll call it her religion. She also taught me morality, but it was basic little boy morality, like don't steal things of other people's. Don't lie. Be nice to your sister. Help with the dishes. It was that kind of a morality, and it was very easy. She also stressed, don't worry about making money or success in this world, because it's a secondary consideration at best. She thought it was very important that I be an upstanding and moral person. That was what she really wanted to impart on me. Now, my mother was pretty upset with her mother having so much of an influence on me, because my mother was pretty much a conventional thinker and went to a conventional church where it was a little different kind of religion. My grandmother's idea of judgment was, yeah, there's rules, but you're going to be judged by someone who loves you very much. So it was like soft rules, a loving ruler. It was kind of a very comfortable thing. My mother put me in her church, which is a little more rigid. It was hard and fast rules, and you could be punished. You could be burned forever. Tortured forever in fire. I trying to get my head around what kind of a God would do that to someone they love just was inconsistent for me. So it wasn't very attractive. But by the way, that was the time when Tavistock was really beefing up the religious fundamentalism to make it really unattractive. Hellfire and brimstone and fear of God is the source of true wisdom and those kind of concepts. So that was keeping me away. Now, I still had conversations with my grandmother. She cut my hair until I was 13 years old. I didn't have a professional haircut. So we would talk, and we would talk about her God and her loving God and what kind of a man I should be. It was really contrasting to the normal Christian church that my mother wanted me to go into. So about the age of 12 or 13, I got into really a strange thing because, there was this formal church and eternal punishment. I mean, what kind of a God is that? It sounds like Barack Obama, and his Guantanamo Bay thing. So anyway, by 13, my hormones were raging. And, all the things that the church was telling me not to do are things that I really want to do. So I thought it was like incompatible with my lifestyle. So I kind of distanced myself from those things, from the hard rules and hard ruler of that and the moral structure. So I'm getting further and further away from my grandmother's traditional wisdom, loving God, and I'm trying to make my way into this sea of beliefs. What should I do? Well, up pops the hippie movement, Tavistock orchestrated. See, what I'm saying is your beliefs are orchestrated to put you in a position where they are today. And I'll when I finish my little story here, I'll tell you the position they want you to be in. So anyway, so the hippie movement's great because, I want to love everybody the way Jesus loved everybody. But sex is the same as love. Love and sex. Make love, not war. Hey, so I'm enrolled. And there we go. So I'm finding myself loosening a morality and finding a morality that I can be comfortable with. It's kind of non-judgmental, very few rules, and in that case, no ruler. Well, being a seeker and looking outside the box, of course, the New Age movement came in. And the New Age movement, and I was specifically interested in, one of the ones was the Course in Miracles. Well, the Jesus in that book was non-judgmental. And so I was getting into a state of mind where there were no rules and no ruler, which I'm coming to learn now after studying Satanism is exactly where they want you to be. They want you to be, do what thou wilt is the only law. That's what Aleister Crowley teaches. So the New Age movement has me set up. Had I not taken part in the natural awakening, there I would be sitting in my New Age belief wardrobe, waiting for Lucifer, who's going to offer that non-judgmental type of activity. Okay, this whole subject talks about the expansion of human consciousness and the forces for evolution and the forces for involution, how they work together and how artificial intelligence is trying to latch on to our ability, an ability that they don't have. But to understand this, let's talk a little bit about the ego and how that works. Now, if the belief is the element, combining the beliefs is done by a thing called the ego. Now, this is not the Freudian ego. Freud was a fraud. He was the godfather of Tavistock. He never did any experimenting. He wasn't science-oriented. He was, quite frankly, BS-oriented. Now, the ego I'm talking about is a scientifically valid element of your personality. Let's put it that way. It was created, or it was discovered by a woman named Jane Lovinger in the 60s. And people have been doing experiment with it and trying to disprove it since then. But it just keeps becoming more and more valid. So this is a construct, and learning about this construct, we're going to be able to manage our beliefs better and keep the damn control matrix from managing all our beliefs and hurting us here and there. Now, this is a meaning-making machine. This little ego is a meaning-making machine. That's all it does. It makes meaning. It gathers beliefs and makes a wardrobe, or gathers beliefs and makes a platform on which you can view the world. I've written a couple books on it. If you really get interested in it, one book called Post-Conventional Personality. It's co-authored by myself and a couple other doctors. You might be interested in it. It's more of a technical book. And then there's Belief Magic. I'm not here to sell books, but if you're interested in this, it's got a whole chapter on the ego. Anyway, let's get into this little ego thing. Now, when I present the ego, I want to present it so that you can control this thing, so that you can control this little ego in your head. So I really want you to think of it as something other than yourself. Think of, this is me and this is my ego. The ego is the little thing that chatters to you all the time, talks to you all the time. It's in your head, and if you're listening to it, that means that you're not it. You got me? So there's two components. And you can even view it. And let's introduce this now. You can introduce one as the left brain and one as the right brain. The left brain would be the ego, the left, concrete, computer-oriented, based on algorithm kind of a thing. I usually use this little illustration because it helps me visualize what the ego might be. I know that this is a cartoon. It's a Disney cartoon from Monster Inc., it's a delightful little cartoon. But I always picture the ego as being this. Now, your ego gets up every morning, and what this little woman or man, depending on your sex, I would imagine you have the same sex ego as you have yourself, who knows? But this ego gathers from all the massive amounts of data that comes into your self every day and sorts it out. Yes, I can accept this. No, I can't accept this. This is consistent with my beliefs. This isn't consistent. Da 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 da. And because they're viewing it from a platform built on these beliefs. So your ego is your filter. It's the reason that it's very difficult to wake people up, because they have this concrete platform to view life from, and it's very hard to change it because it's very scary. You're out there floating around. You can imagine if you had no frame of reference and you were just floating, getting information, you couldn't deal with life. So your ego, this little guy, helps you. But it's not always looking out for your best interest. It's always looking out for its best interest. So your ego gathers things, gathers beliefs, and if Tavistock's playing their cards right, if the control system is doing what it should, and doing what it has been doing for the last 6,000 years, it feeds you information that constitutes your belief system. So when the control matrix controls education and teaches you not to trust your own senses, but to trust only science, it's creating an epistemology where you're very selective at the things you let in, which you should be. So your education system creates your ego's foundation. And because the control system, the matrix, gives you this platform, they control who you think you are, what you can do, what's possible, what's impossible, because they control the ego. They do right now, they control your ego. But they don't have to. They don't have to. And that's the basic information in belief magic. They don't have to control your ego. You can control your ego. And if you control your ego, you're free from their matrix. Now let's talk a little bit about this little guy or girl and what they like to do. Now, you might be surprised to know that the ego is not even the least bit interested in truth. The ego is interested in consistency and having a worldview that they can depend on, that doesn't change and flip around. It's very difficult to wake people up because this is a sacred belief structure that the ego is maintaining. You can picture him walking around with a gun and trying to, not interested in truth. He's interested in saving face, self-justification. Those are his motivations. His motivation isn't truth. That's why I think that the awakening is really true. Because now, certain egos, and you can tell it, certain egos are interested in waking up. They're interested in the truth. And if you listen to a conversation between two people that are really into the awakening, they're sharing information. Oh, where did you hear that? How can you believe them? Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not a, well, I can't believe that. That sounds like bullshit. No, you don't hear that. You hear, oh, where did you get that? Where can we go to get some more of that? Where did you find that? People that are awakening, their egos, I believe, have a interest in the truth. For the first time, maybe in the history of the human race, they're interested in the truth. It's interesting. So, you live with this ego, and it kind of guides you in life. It keeps you on an even keel. But it also runs your life. It also tells you what's possible. And because the control system has fed your ego beliefs that has limited what's possible, your sense of reality is tiny. Especially if you live in consensual reality and you don't go into the margin or the fringes. You stick with consensual reality. Your reality is so small. Your reality is so small you can't realize the enormity of the conspiracy. How long it's been on the earth, how long it's been lasting, and how meticulous they are in putting this thing together. Now, I'm gonna throw this out. Having not ever published this information, I'm going to say that the ego is mostly, or maybe exclusively, a left brain operation. Now, your left brain is your logical thinking, clink, clink, clink. It's verbal. It's very tied to processes. When you talk about a computer or even an AI, I believe, it's a process-oriented thing. They use algorithms, patterns, ... Your right brain, on the other hand, is inspirational. I have a tendency, because I'm in my right brain a lot, to think that it's connected with some type of, I hate to use the word universal consciousness, but some type of an infinite awareness that on occasion you can tap into. That makes human beings infinitely superior to any kind of a computer. I think even an AI. Because an AI would have to be downloaded with all the information in the universe to be compatible with your right brain. This is my idea. I'm not a computer person, and I definitely will take feedback on that kind of thing. Now, when Jane Lovinger was discovering this little element of your personality that Tavistock controls right now, actually, it controls us right now. We have to fight every day to keep our viewpoint fresh and working toward truth, because they want to give us information that helps them, of course. And that's what we're going to use an example later on and show you how this thing fits together. Lovinger, here's a real important piece, because this is a piece that could be really dangerous, and you'll learn about that at the end, but let me tell you this piece. Jane Lovinger, when she was putting this together, found that there was a definite pattern that the ego would follow as it was growing, as it was expanding. And she called it the ego expansion. I like to call it consciousness expansion also. It starts from the elemental level. I'm sure some of you have looked at Piaget's work, where he's looked at children and how they develop developmental stages of children. Well, this is a little bit more esoteric, but real similar. For example, all right, what I want to do is I want to give you just a taste of Lovinger's model and how this works. It's not a theoretical thing. It's an actual scientific fact. And every 10 years, a group of psychologists get together and they write a book that's kind of condenses all the experiments that's been done with this model. I was lucky enough to be involved in writing Post-Conventional Personality and editing Post-Conventional Personality. This is the most recent collection of these things. So it's not like Freud's ego. This is the real thing, and it really is operating inside your head right now. And it's a stage model, and you can tell when your ego moves from one stage to another. One of the rules is everybody starts at the first stage, which is called pre-social or symbiotic stage, and they move through their life from one stage to another. Most people don't get very high in this stage model, but we all start at the beginning. Let me talk to you a little bit about a transition so that you can see a little bit about what I'm talking. Third stage of ego development is called the self-protective stage, and this stage is the stage you're in before you go to school. Self-protective is one of those things where you really get this is my stuff. It's not your stuff. It's all about me, me, me. Some people stay in this stage all their lives. I think that governments never operate above this stage of ego development, the self-protective stage. And when you reach 6 or 7 and start to go to school, you switch into the conformist stage. It automatically happens. And you become a rule follower. Little girls behave like this, little boys behave like this. This is proper. You realize the wisdom of having some authority around. It's not just me, me, me. So you see how the change happens. That's all. You can go in. I found this on the internet. It's called Lovinger's 9 Stages of Ego Development. It's in the Personality Cafe. And as someone who knows this model pretty well, this is pretty good characterization. And this might be interesting for you to find more about the stages and how it happens. Now, the difference between the conformist stage and the self-protective stage generally happens automatically. In my studies, I've cataloged where people have had a dream that the next morning, because of this dream, they acted differently. It's just a very subtle thing. In the higher stages, it's because your ego was loose enough to entertain new ideas. Generally, it'll go through a dilemma. Oh my God, oh, what's happening to me? My wife's giving me a divorce. And you might need to change your beliefs to accommodate what's happened. And a lot of times this will happen in a higher level of ego development, a shift higher. The final stage in egos, in her development, is called the integrated stage. And it says the ego shows wisdom, broad empathy toward oneself and others, and a capacity not just to be aware of inner conflicts, blah, 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 blah. Let me give you the abridged version. As you get higher and higher in ego development, and there are stages actually that are theorized even higher than this, your concept of you becomes huge. First of all, it's down in the conformist stage, it's me and maybe my classmates, maybe the girls in my class, and then it gets bigger and bigger. Maybe I identify with all the people in this group. Maybe I feel like I'm a black person and I identify with those as you get higher, and then you identify with all the human race. And I don't mean just identify. I mean you feel their pain. We're people. We're not psychopaths. You feel their pain. You don't want them to suffer. And then it gets bigger. It's all of nature. All of reality becomes part of you. And when somebody damages the rainforest, it's like, oh, geez. And it's not because you're in some green agenda. It's because you really feel that that's a desecration of you, until it broadens and broadens until it encompasses everything. That's the highest stage of ego development. Now, in that development, of course, you become infinitely compassionate. And so you can see how it grows. And I think the awakening that's taking place on the planet is making people exposed to so much pain, so much horrible things that are happening, that it's spurring ego development. Oh, I have to reconceptualize. My old ideas don't fit that anymore. I have to go move to a higher level. A lot of people do. But it's your ego. See, your ego will keep you in that same level and suffer pain and pain and pain until finally, oh, I just can't take it anymore. I have to think differently. And that's how, and then you'll pop to the next section. I've seen more evidence of ego development in the last 5 years than I ever have before. Most people either get to the conformist stage or the one stage higher, the conscientious stage. That's the way they'll be the rest of their lives. But now, with the awakening, they're driving us. They're causing us to be more and more awake. And it's scaring them, because they know that we have a component that's separate from our ego that they want to own, but right now I think they're pretty terrified of. The ego is their tool of enslavement. It's what they use to keep us down, and I'll give you a real good example in a few minutes. But it's also a tool of our liberation. When we control our own ego, when we control our own beliefs, we're free. And the more beliefs we can control. See, they control our beliefs now. They control our ego. Our ego wants to be fashionable. We don't want to be embarrassed by thinking outside the box. We want to know about the newest movies so they can download stuff into us. See how they use our ego, our bodies. They have us identifying with our bodies. Having a beautiful body is really important now. They want us to identify with the body. The body is something. So if something happens to desecrate your body, like aging. Oh my God, we can't have aging. We have to have Botox. We have to have a better diet. You see how they control you by controlling your values and your ego? I hope you understand, because this is our trick to freeing ourselves. I also think it's important to say that The Satanists and the Luciferians have the people in that cult worshiping their ego. They tell them that their ego is God. And so death is the most horrible thing that can happen. Aging is the most horrible thing. And so they drink blood. They do sodomy. They do whatever they can to keep themselves young and healthy. I also think they know how to transfer egos from bodies, but let's not get into that right now. By the way, speaking of living forever and immortal and fearing death, my own personal feeling is that we are immortal. Our ego may not be, but we are immortal, so we don't need to worry about that stuff. We are like the Creator God. We're connected with this divine awareness. We're not gods, but we're like a God. We're in the image of a God. And speaking of that, what I want to do is I want to take you into a belief structure that they've created. Now we're going from an ego to a little bigger structure. And I'm going to talk to you about how they create these structures, this Luciferian structure. And as we go through, as we talk about this Luciferian structure, you're going to be amazed at how much like a computer program it is, how patterned it is, how algorithmic it is. So let's get into it. The one I've chosen to do is Christianity. And I've chosen that because I'm most familiar with it. I was raised, my grandmother gave me the first inkling of my belief system, my belief wardrobe, and my little ego, is still pretty much aligned with that structure. This is a major, what I call a Luciferian funnel. See, what they've created is they've created funnels to put us where they want us to be, to put in the new Luciferian religion that'll control the one world government. They're like funnels. They capture you, and I talked about a couple of them in the beginning. The hippie movement was one of the funnels. Break up the family, break up the morality, get them into sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and away from the traditional morality that kept the society together all this time, because we need them to be loosened up for the Luciferian introduction that's coming very, very shortly. The New Age movement is the same thing. This is a spiritual teachings that came directly from, they all can source back to H.P. Blavatsky, the Theosophical Society, and that type of movement. They're all kind of branches off of that, even though it looks like they came from the Far East, and this is from this. They're all kind of manufactured to give this New Age belief system, which is subtle, but it's very dangerous. It's very difficult to talk to a New Ager because this belief system is so seductive, and it sounds so wonderful that the ego just struggles not to let go of this. How many times have we been involved with talking to somebody about a New Age belief? Like one New Age belief is if you have negative thoughts, it'll bring negative things to you. It's absurd on its face. I mean, how many people have had horrible things done to them or happened to them, and they were perfectly happy people? There's a type of person in the Enneagram called an epicure that thinks happy thoughts all the time. And I've coached them, and I've been with them, and they have bad things happen with them as well as good things. I mean, so it's kind of an absurdity on its face, but it's really a core belief in a lot of the New Age things. And if you have that belief, you don't look into things if they're negative. You don't know about Satanism, what's going on there. You don't want to bother with what's going on in Greece and the collapse of the financial system. No, don't bother me with that. I don't want to focus on negative things because it'll bring negative things to me. No, if you keep your head in the sand, your butt's in the air. And that makes you very, very vulnerable. So it's a collection of beliefs. The New Age movement, to my mind, is a collection of beliefs. Now, there's some good stuff in there. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I just want to throw the bathwater out. There are a lot of things, and you have to look at it for yourself. What's making me more open and susceptible to the Luciferian Maitreya that's going to be coming and being introduced by the Pope, among other religious leaders? I don't want to just hang this on the Pope because it's being followed by a lot of different religious leaders. Now, to work with the concepts, the ego, and the belief structures, and how we're given our belief structures, let's look at Christianity. And the reason I use Christianity and Judaism is because I'm pretty much familiar with those, and there's some really good examples on the internet. So what I'm going to show you first is a little clip from the original Zeitgeist movie by Peter Joseph. It's very well done, and he uses it to show kind of like the absurdity and everything is just a sun worship thing, and to, I don't know, show the frivolity or something of this. But I think that if we really look at this, and we will after, I think it reveals a whole lot more. So let's look at that right now.
This is Horus. He is the sun god of Egypt of around 3000 BC. He is the sun anthropomorphized, and his life is a series of allegorical myths involving the sun's movement in the sky. From the ancient hieroglyphics in Egypt, we know much about the solar messiah. For instance, Horus, being the sun or the light, had an enemy known as Set, and Set was the personification of the darkness or night. And, metaphorically speaking, every morning Horus would win the battle against Set, while in the evening Set would conquer Horus and send him into the underworld. It is important to note that dark versus light, or good versus evil, is one of the most ubiquitous mythological dualities ever known, and is still expressed on many levels to this day. Broadly speaking, the story of Horus is as follows. Horus was born on December 25th of the Virgin Isis Mary. His birth was accompanied by a star in the east, which, in turn, 3 kings followed to locate and adorn the newborn Savior. At the age of 12, he was a prodigal child teacher, and at the age of 30, he was baptized by a figure known as Anup, and thus began his ministry. Horus had 12 disciples he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick and walking on water. Horus was known by many gestural names such as the Truth, the Light, God's Anointed Son, the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, and many others. After being betrayed by Typhon, Horus was crucified, buried for 3 days, and thus resurrected. These attributes of Horus, whether original or not, seem to permeate many cultures of the world, for many other gods are found to have the same general mythological structure. Attis of Phrygia, born of the Virgin Nana on December 25th, crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected. Krishna of India, born of the Virgin Devaki, with a star in the east signaling his coming. He performed miracles with his disciples, and, upon his death, was resurrected. Dionysius of Greece, born of a virgin on December 25th, was a traveling teacher who performed miracles such as turning water into wine. He was referred to as the King of Kings, God's only begotten Son, the Alpha and Omega, and many others. And, upon his death, he was resurrected. Mithra of Persia, born of a virgin on December 25th, he had 12 disciples and performed miracles, and upon his death was buried for 3 days and thus resurrected. He was also referred to as the Truth, the Light, and many others. Interestingly, the sacred day of worship of Mithra was Sunday. The fact of the matter is, there are numerous saviors from different periods from all over the world which subscribe to these general characteristics. The question remains, why these attributes? Why the virgin birth on December 25th? Why dead for 3 days and the inevitable resurrection? Why 12 disciples or followers? To find out, let's examine the most recent of the solar messiahs. Jesus Christ was born of the Virgin Mary on December 25th in Bethlehem. His birth was announced by a star in the east, which 3 kings or magi followed to locate and adorn the new Savior. He was a child teacher at 12, and at the age of 30 he was baptized by John the Baptist, and thus began his ministry. Jesus had 12 disciples, which he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick, walking on water, raising the dead. He was also known as the King of Kings, the Son of God, the Light of the World, the Alpha and Omega, the Lamb of God, and many, many others. After being betrayed by his disciple Judas and sold for 30 pieces of silver, he was crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected and ascended into heaven.
Peter Joseph goes on to explain that it's all based on astrological placements, and those are our ancient beliefs. But I want you to look at something a little different. I want you to look at it as a pattern. They all had this component, they all had this component, they all had this component. It's a pattern. Remember, the predator, the AI, the Satanist, the Luciferian, they're not creative. They rely on patterns, and they do the same pattern over and over. The creative thing is what they want for us, because we can create reality. They have to copy it. So what I see when I watch this is a pattern, and they use this pattern over and over again for thousands of years to create overlays for their Luciferian structure. Now, you Christians, don't turn me off. What I'm saying is, it's a patterned overlay that they use in all their religions that they corrupt. I'm not saying that the basic structure or the core thing there is corrupted. I'm saying that when they change a belief system into a system that they use for religious control, it follows this pattern. Remember, Seneca the Younger said, religion, it's true to the common people, it's false to the wise, and it's useful to the rulers. So they want to make it useful to them. They use this pattern. Now, it's not unlike the pattern that they use for false flags. If you've listened to any of our discussions on World Beyond Belief with Oli Damagard, you know that every false flag follows the same pattern. These people are not creative. They'll usually have a drill going on, the security will be down, or the security cameras will be off. You know the drill. The news will know things before they actually happen. Also, the correct people are on site. The general public is not on site. I mean, if you picture any of them, Sandy Hook, 9/11, Kennedy assassination, they all follow the same pattern. They're not creative. They're an AI. The predator is at least partially an AI. And that's what they've created in this particular thing. And they use it because it gets to your ego. Your ego follows it. It's seen it before. It's familiar. It'll let it in. See? Back in the old 2,000, 3,000 years ago, a belief system had a structure. And if it had this structure that Peter Joseph just showed you, you could let it in. It was normal. Remember, the ego wants to be normal. The ego wants to be conforming. It doesn't want to be outside the box. So there you have it. Let's move it to... Oh, also, I need to mention that this AI is very intelligent. So it'll target the ego level. And the ego level there it's got to be the conformist stage or below. So, they do their patterns that appeal to a certain level of ego development. It's interesting. Let's go back to Christianity a little bit more. Now, I read a book a while back called Caesar's Messiah by Joseph Atwell. And it talks about how Constantine, the Caesar, that was the first Caesar to accept Christianity, and become a Christian, created this religion to allow him to do certain things and manipulate the people. Christians, I'm not saying that your religion is not valid. What I'm saying is the overlay put on it by the Luciferian control system is not true. Let's go back to the beginning here. We can trace the satanic Luciferian control system back to Canaan, back to Babylonia. We know that they sacrificed. I mean, we know they're Luciferians. You don't have to look into it very deeply to know. And I would say that following that lineage all the way down through history, you're not going to find a ruler of an empire, of a large, even state, that wasn't Luciferian, or at least influenced by a Luciferian Satanist. Because if they weren't, a Satanist or Luciferian would come in and kill them and take over. I mean, it's just as simple as that. That's the history of the world. So, the way Atwell presents Constantine's dilemma is that he was in a battle with the Jews. Now, you know that Rome was, or not Rome, Constantine was imperialistic. He was a conqueror, and he would conquer peoples, and it was really important that those people worshipped the Caesar. No problem for most of the people that he conquered, because they were pagan. They were sun worshippers, but they were sun worshippers of the actual sun. Luciferians worship the sun, but they worship the dark sun. They worship Saturn. Although they're going to come on as the bringers of light. I'll straighten that out later. Let me get into the story a little bit more. So when they would conquer a pagan area, they would tell them to worship Caesar, and they'd say, no problem, we'll put him on the totem with the rest of we can put him on the top, we don't care. We have a lot of other gods we're worshiping. There was a big problem with the Jews, though. The Jews are monotheistic. They only have one God, and they're not going to give up their God for a Caesar. So the Jews were ferocious fighters, and Constantine was spending a lot of time and effort, wasting a lot of time and effort with these people. So according to Atwell's book, bear me out, what happened was there was a person named Josephus, and Josephus was a Jewish child raised in the Jewish community there, but he was adopted by the Flavian Caesars, Constantine, and he was raised with them. He became actually one of them. And what Constantine did, according to Atwell, now Atwell's a Bible scholar. What he did was he caused Josephus to write two things. One, a history, and two was the Old Testament. Now I know that's heresy for a lot of Christians, but bear with me on this. And the one would predict the other one. So it looked like things that were happening at one time were predicted at another time. The book of Daniel is a good example of that. How you can predate something and have somebody predict it when it's written about the same time, but published as a much later date. So they used that trick, and he created all the mythology around Christianity and the New Testament and the worship of this healer from Galilee. And there's a lot of interesting things in the book. I think if you're a Christian, I think you owe it yourself to read this book so that you can be conversant in it. A lot of the code, you know how the cabal communicates with one another now in symbols. Like if they show you a butterfly, they're communicating with the other Kabbalists this message. But it might mean something else to the normal person, but it's also communicating to your subconscious. Well, they did that with words in this in this new Bible that supposedly Josephus wrote. And this is the New Testament. The Old Testament was a collection that they put onto it. So one of the things that's interesting, and one of the code words, was Mary. Now, you know that there's a lot of Marys in the New Testament. Why are there a lot of Marys in the New Testament? Because, according to Adwell, Mary was the Roman word for rebellious Jewish woman. And so this Mary and that Mary, so you can picture the Roman nobles and the Roman elites reading this book and laughing. Meanwhile, it's communicating a belief system later on when he makes it a state religion. So Constantine, according to Atwell, makes it a state religion. And the reason he did this was because the Jews were expecting a Messiah anyway. So he just fulfilled their prophecies. And he fulfilled their prophecies with a character that does a couple things. One, it's not afraid of taxes. Remember, it says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God. Well, in the Roman Empire, Caesar's God. So it turns over everything. So the new Christians had a belief structure where they were turning over their things, rendering under Caesar, rendering under God, same story. Also, this new character seemed to turn the other cheek. So it took this fiercely combative Jewish nation, fiercely holding on to their values, and made it into a turn the other cheek kind of religion. Now that's why Atwell said that the thing was created. I think there's a lot of holes in that, but listen to this part. There's a lot of historical reference to a person in Galilee that lived during the alleged time of Jesus Christ. And this person did all the things, or many of the things, that Jesus Christ was attributed to doing. He was all about love. He was all about loving one another. So there was a historical being that started, had a following of disciples during that time, and he had a little religion. This person's name was Lazarus. So Lazarus might have been, in my mind, the template that the Luciferians used to create, perhaps, the Christian structure over top of this wonderful Son of God, perhaps, that actually did function and did work. And Atwell acknowledges that this is a historical figure. He did exist, and he did these things. So let's go back to Constantine. Now, Constantine, to my mind, has to be a Luciferian to the core. To be that powerful at that time, you have to worship those things. And a lot of things lead me to believe that. Some of them, I'll have a little clip that kind of summarizes a lot of things. But one of them that's really bugging me right now is changing the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. It seems like a little insignificant thing. Why is Paul bothering explaining this to me? After he took over, he would punish anybody that was keeping the Sabbath. The Sabbath is in the Old Testament. It's a core Jewish belief. It's not just in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, it's on the first page of the Old Testament. The Sabbath is a sanctified day. He changes it. Constantine changes it. Lazarus, or Jesus, didn't change it. Jesus was a Jew all of his life. Jesus kept the Sabbath. But they changed it to Sunday. Why? Because the Luciferians worship the black sun. They worship sun. So Sunday had to be changed to the day of worship. And that's a clue coming up right now. Notice the Pope is gathering all the religions together so we can have a one world religion. And he wants them all to agree on keeping Sunday holy. Well, that's a big tell for me. Let's look a little more at how Constantine created the Luciferian AI overlay to make this make this wonderful visitation by perhaps a divine being into a controllable religion. Let's look at this.
Christianity didn't just spring up overnight. It took centuries to gain a strong foothold, or perhaps stranglehold would be a more fitting word. In fact, many of the tenets considered today by the church and countless followers to be gospel law weren't decided upon until 325 AD at what was called the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea, presided over by the Roman Emperor Constantine. It was at the Council of Nicaea that many key doctrines of the Christian faith were decided, clearly a full 3¼ centuries after Christ's alleged crucifixion. The council, what transpired there, and what then followed would set the stage for the longest, bloodiest reign of intolerance the world has ever known. Now, in her meticulously researched book called The Christ Conspiracy, the greatest story ever sold, the brilliant scholar and linguist Atreya S. offers the following concerning the Council of Nicaea. She stated, "At the Council of Nicaea were not only Christian leaders from Alexandria, Antioch, Athens, Jerusalem, and Rome, but also the leaders of the many other cult sects and religions, including those of Apollo Demeter, Ceres, Dionysus, Bacchus, Iasus, Janus, Jupiter, Zeus, Ons, Dagon, Osiris and Isis, and Sol Invictus, the invincible sun, the object of Constantine's devotion." Now, the purpose of the council was to unite all of the above mentioned into one universal religion. Rome was to be the chief authority. Now, Rome claimed authority because it was said to be built upon the Rock of Peter. Well, Rock of Mithra is really more like it. Now, Atreya S. states, quote, "In a typical religion-making move, the gods of these other cults were subjugated under the new god and changed into apostles and saints." Now, the Nicene Council melded all of the pagan religions of the time into a new unified Catholic religion. That's what the word means, unified. It wasn't until the council convened that the name or title, Jesus Christ, was decided upon. Atreya S. goes on to state, quote, "As stated, it is maintained that during the Nicene Council, the names Jesus and Christ were put together for the first time in the phrase Jesus Christ or Christ Jesus, uniting two of the major factions, with Jesus representing the Jesus of the Druids, Joshua/Jesus of the Israelites, Horus/Iusa of the Egyptians, and Ies/Iesos of the Dionysians Samarificans, and Christ representing the Krishna/Christos of India, the anointed of the Jews, and cursed, KRST, of Egypt, among others. It is thus alleged that the phrase Jesus Christ, which had never been a name, does not appear in Greek or Latin authors prior to the First Council of Nicaea. So in other words, what Atreya is stating is that there was simply never a historical person by the name of Jesus Christ. Now, I personally don't doubt that there were Gnostic teachers that existed in that area of the world at the time. But certainly, if there was such a teacher who was a healer, who held great wisdom and spoke in parables and all these things attributed to Christ, his name certainly was not Jesus Christ. Jesus and Christ is more of a title. Both names were meshed together, and they're both amalgamations of several different mythological gods that came before. Now, Constantine The Roman Emperor Constantine himself was a pagan sun worshipper, paying homage at the Grand Temple of the Sun in the Vosges mountains of Gaul. It was there that Constantine claimed to have had his first vision. While fighting a campaign against Maxentius, Constantine claimed to have a second vision, that of a lighted cross in the sky, which he had painted on his soldiers' shields, believing it would guarantee victory over his enemies. It always seems to be a vision that so many creeds are founded upon, doesn't it? Now, as stated earlier, the sign of the cross goes back to ancient times and was a solar symbol that was considered sacred in pagan religions. It was after his triumph that Constantine converted to Christianity, but did not become baptized until he was near his death. Now, as the main authority of the new state religion, that's what Catholicism is, or was, the greatest political movement ever undertaken, probably. So it was a state religion. Okay, so as the main authority of this new state religion and as a newly converted Christian, Constantine was, of course, an upstanding man of high moral character, right? He had his own son put to death. He drowned his own wife in an overheated bath. Constantine had his 2 nephews flogged to death and his brother-in-law killed, as well as nearly a dozen other family members. His political rivals were bled to death. In the 4th century, the emperor had over 3,000 Christians tortured and executed simply because their interpretation of the Bible did not agree with his. Nice guy. Now, under Constantine's new creed, in the quest to conquer Europe for Christianity, tens of millions of innocent people would be massacred in brutal and bloody holocausts that acted as the building blocks for the mind prison called Christianity. From the Council of Nicaea sprang the most violent, bloodiest horrors and persecutions. It was at the Council of Nicaea that so many decisions were made that affect masses of people even to this day. Apparently, the council turned into a bloody melee as arguing bishops decided upon the new doctrines and creeds. The bishops presented at the council, the bishops that were present at the council were told how they should vote beforehand. Bishops who disagreed were removed from the council by armed henchmen and excommunicated. Now, in this case, excommunication consisted of exile to remote islands. Documents were removed and destroyed. Now, among doctrines decided upon at the Council of Nicaea were the doctrine of the Trinity was adopted, the idea of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost in one being, a far earlier pagan concept, as with Horus, Osiris, Isis from Egypt, Rama, Vishnu, and Shiva from India, Nimrod, Tammuz, Semiramis, Babylonian, and etc. The most ancient depiction of a Trinity concept apparently was depicted as a man in various stages of life, newborn, mature, and elderly, which depicted various stages of the sun. The newborn represented the dawn, the mature adult represented noon, and the elderly represents dusk as the sun dies, only to be resurrected the next morning. The Roman Sun Day was adopted as the Christian Sabbath. Now, Sunday was the day of worship for Mithra. The sign of the cross, previously associated with many solar cults, was adopted as the Christian emblem. The celebration of Easter was adopted. Now, the word Easter comes from the myth of the ancient goddess Ishtar. Authority was bestowed upon bishops, concentrating enormous power into the hands of the few. The councils created Jesus was declared the Messiah by vote. Okay? The newly decided church doctrines, what became the New Testament, were coupled with the Hebrew writings, the Old Testament, and this was done probably as a means to make the new doctrines a little more credible or to attempt to add some historicity to them. Now, the council fashioned what became known as the Nicene Creed, which established the following. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible, and in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, and born of the Father before all ages, light of light, true God of true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial to the Father, by whom all things were made, who for us men and for our salvation come down from heaven, and was incarnate of the Holy Ghost and of the Virgin Mary, and was made man, was crucified also for us under Pontius Pilate, suffered and was buried, and the third day rose again according to the Scriptures, and descended into heaven, sits at the right hand of the Father, and shall come again with glory to judge the living and the dead, of whose kingdom there shall be no end. And in the Holy Ghost, the Lord and giver of life, who proceeds from the Father, who together with the Father and the Son is to be adored and glorified, who spoke by the prophets, and one holy Catholic and apostolic church. We confess one baptism for the remission of sins, and we look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Amen. Now, after the council convened, there was still no official version of the New Testament. A religious police force was assembled and commissioned to destroy all religious texts that were not in agreement with the new official state religion. Now, clearly, Constantine understood the political advantage to be gained by uniting the flourishing religions under a new consolidated Roman authority with himself as the head. Now, following Constantine's example, a contemporary named Athanasius ordered the expulsion of heretics and documents from monasteries. The result was the loss of the largest collection of Gnostic writings in history. Now, as the Catholic Empire began to spread in 389 AD, the Emperor Theodosius ordered the Library of Alexandria in Egypt to be burned down. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria marked the greatest loss of valuable information in history. It was the largest library in the world, and more than 700,000 manuscripts, scrolls, and documents were lost. To this day, none of the books of the New Testament are declared to be official by any authority or council. Now let that sink in. Now, as the empire grew in power and influence, so-called pagan libraries, sacred temples, and documents were destroyed to instill the new authority and also to remove any shred of evidence of the new state religion's connection to the pagan mythologies that it was based and founded upon. New temples and churches were erected on ancient pagan sacred sites, not least because many of the sacred pagan sites were constructed upon the Earth's energy points. Okay, so these new temples were built on the sites of ancient pagan temples, and any literature, art, monuments, etc. were systematically removed, burned, or otherwise destroyed. The church leaders understood that to gain an ever-increasing power base, they had to control the knowledge. Any documents, manuscripts, codices, etc. that were not approved by the church were destroyed or removed from circulation. What followed the empire's brutal onslaught eventually evolved into the lowest cultural point the planet has ever known, the Dark Ages, effectively setting back human knowledge by thousands of years. Now, in the 6th century BC, Pythagoras introduced the theory that the Earth revolved around the sun. Later, approximately 270 BC, a Greek astronomer named Aristarchus actually proved the theory by developing a method of timing half-moon cycles. This became accepted knowledge for a while, that is, until the church destroyed the knowledge. Now, both Copernicus and Galileo were persecuted by the church for reintroducing the truth about the earth revolving around the sun, and Galileo was threatened with death and actually spent the last 8 years of his life under house arrest for daring to challenge the church's idea that the earth was the center of the universe. The church insisted on replacing sound scientific theory with utter nonsense, and here is a blatant example. In the late 1800s, a church authority by the name of Father Hardonin offered this explanation for the Earth's rotation. He said, "The rotation of the Earth is caused by lost souls trying to escape from the fire in the center of the Earth, which is the wall of hell, thus making the whole revolve as the squirrel by climbing turns its cage." Yes, that certainly sounds reasonable. This is just one example of the ridiculous nonsense forced upon mankind by the church, which effectively set back human, spiritual, and scientific progress by thousands of years. In many ways, the ages-old dogmas of the church still keep people in spiritual bondage to this day, as followers blindly accept the superstitious, nonsensical absurdities espoused by the church, whose primary enemies seem to be knowledge and understanding. Yes, to this day, ladies and gentlemen, religion seems to be one of the most powerfully effective forms of mind control ever devised.
Well, that was a load of information. And I don't know whether you've ever heard that before, but if you haven't, check your ego out. How's my ego dealing with this? Is it making me tight in my stomach? Is this something that my ego doesn't want to deal with? Always do that as you go through new information, because your ego will have a different reaction maybe than you do. Anyway, it's an interesting story how Constantine created the church that we know as the Catholic Church. And it was the vehicle that ushered Christianity down to us, except I think there was always an undercurrent of real Christianity floating around. And I'll tell you about the Cathars in a minute, how that's just one sect that happened to pop up. You know that Constantine was baptized as a Christian, but he was baptized as a Christian on his deathbed, so that in his rationale, and the rationality of the priests was that so he could do his earthly duties without being obstructed by the rules of Christianity. So it was like he's on his deathbed. Okay, I want to make sure I go to heaven, so I do that. The thing that tipped me off about Constantine's creation, and maybe the fact that Constantine wasn't really serious about adopting Christianity, is the affluence. I mean, your Christian sect, I think, would take vows of poverty. I mean, it's that my grandma's Jesus is that kind of a person. But he was always very opulent. And rather than picking someone as the first pope to be the most pious, the most knowledgeable about the supposed life of Jesus, was Lazarus, he picked his cousin. He picked another Flavian Caesar. So I think it was set up as a control mechanism from the beginning. The change to Sunday was done by the Pope. And looking at the Old Testament and changing the Sabbath to Sunday is saying that the Pope supersedes the Bible. And I think that really iced it for me, that you go to the Pope and he can make a decision outside of the Bible. Now, we can always look at it that, things change and maybe he's more on the spot and stuff. But what's going to change about the Sabbath? So time goes on, and the Catholic Church is involved in many wars. It's got a checkered past at best. I think that it's easy to see that it's a Luciferian construction for controlling people. It's much easier to control people when you have a belief structure in their mind, in their egos, that's going to patrol them all the time. You don't need to have an army there, So that's how it happened. And then, of course, 11th century, the story of the Cathars in southern France. The Cathars were a sect that followed the true patterns of Jesus. And they took vows of poverty. I think they were vegans. Men and women were equal in their church. The highest level that you can achieve in the Catholic Church for a woman is none. And what else did they do? They were forbidden from swearing oaths, and they were very, very tolerant. Well, the Catholic Church came in and wiped out the Cathars. They wiped out everything about the Cathars. They wiped out the entire settlement of the Cathars, everybody that believed in the Cathars, and they even put lime all over the landscape so that nothing could be grown there. It sounds like a Sounds like they were really threatened by something that the Cathars knew. Another thing that gets me about the Catholic Church, our Christian heritage, is that they began selling indulgences. And I thought this was really interesting when I first heard about this. If you're going to purgatory, which is an in-between heaven and hell, so that with the heaven and hell, there's no good, indulgences don't work. With the heaven and hell, you're either there or not. And I suppose you could sell an indulgence to get you out of hell. But they would sell indulgences to limit your time in purgatory. Purgatory is kind of an in-between. Well, he wasn't that bad, but he has to spend time in purgatory. You can't go. But you could buy your way out of that if you were rich by buying these indulgences. And to me, that's extortion. It's as simple as the mafia coming around to my store and saying, it looks like your store might burn down. We can ensure that your store won't burn down if you pay us something every month. What else? And then of course, there's the Jesuits. The Jesuits was created in the 15th century because people were leaving the Catholic Church and they were going into the Protestant Church. They were finding problems with the Luciferian structure, and they wanted to go back to a more pure form. Now, became immediately corrupted also, and sometimes they were more draconian than the Catholics. But Loyal Ignatius started this thing called the Jesuits to take apart the Reformation, to take apart the people that were the Protestant uprising, and to wipe out everybody that wasn't Catholics. And they had to swear an oath, and they still do. Actually, your Pope right now, Pope Francis, is General Jorge Bergoglio of the Jesuits, and he's taken this oath. Here's part of it. I furthermore promise and declare that I will, when the opportunity present, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics. Now, a heretic, of course, is anybody that's not a Catholic. Protestants and liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics. I don't even know how to flay somebody. Rip up the stomachs and wombs of their women, and crush their infants' heads against the walls in order to annihilate forever their execrable race. That when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisoned cup, the strangling cord, the steel of the poniard, or the leaden bullet, regardless of the honor, rank, dignity, or authority of person or persons, whatever may be their condition in life, either public or private, as I, at any time, may be directed to do so by any agent of the Pope or superior of the Brotherhood of the Holy Faith of the Society of Jesus. In confirmation of which I hereby dedicate my life, my soul, and my corporal power. And with this dagger, which I now receive, I will subscribe my name written in my own blood, in testimony thereof. And should I prove false or wicked in my determination, may my brethren and fellow soldiers of militia of Pope cut off my hands and my feet, and my throat from ear to ear, my belly opened and sulfur burned wherein, with all the punishment that can be afflicted upon me on earth, and my soul be tortured by demons in an external hell forever. It really doesn't sound like my grandma's Jesus. I'll just share this with you now. But anyway, now the new Pope we have is openly Luciferian. Here's a little clip of him positioning Satan or Lucifer as Jesus's father.
Seus Lucifer matutinus inveniat, ille inquam Lucifer qui nescito casum, Christus filius tuus, qui regressus ab inferis, humano generis serenus iluxit, et tecum vivit et regnat in saecula saeculorum.
How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High.
That was a shocker when I first saw that one. And of course, this Pope has instituted a new Mass called the Novus Ordo, the New World Order Mass. So I think we can see where he's going. And of course, the Church always ends their prayers with Amen, sending their sentiments off to Amun-Ra, the sun god of Egypt. It's amazing when you look into it. I want to come over there through the screen and comfort your ego. I mean, if this is new information to you, sometimes it's tough to look at. But they control you through your belief system. And unless you're willing to look at your ego and have your ego look at your belief system, so it's like a wardrobe. You know, you just have to change your beliefs. It's hard. It's probably the hardest thing you do. And some beliefs conflict with the others. But you really need to look at your beliefs, and you need to get ready to go for the truth. Because there is a truth. There's a basic truth. And we're going to find it together. And we're going to get this predatory monkey off our back. Now, before I leave mainline religion, I want to mention Protestantism. Now, Protestantism is anytime 10 people get together, the control system is there to make sure that your egos are managed, that your belief systems are managed, so that they're consistent with the Luciferian movement now. I just noticed the other day that there's 28,000 pastors in the United States who have signed up to work in the FEMA camps. Now, they're going to work in the FEMA camps. When they take people to the FEMA camps, allegedly, they'll separate the men from the women from the children. And these pastors signed up to comfort them while they're working for the New World Order. And it just really saddened me. I don't know where you go from there, but I just wanted to make sure that you realize that the whole orchestration led by the Pope, but other religions, I mean other Christian religions and other kind of splinter Christian religions like the other strange religions are falling in suit too, and they're all going to go for this worshiping on Sunday thing. So that's enough for that. I want to switch over quickly before we end this program and talk a little bit about the New Age movement. It's a very dangerous movement, and it was dangerous because it puts you into the mind frame of Satanism, Luciferianism. It changes your morality to that. And I thought that was the most dangerous thing. I realized that I was looking at the list of people that belong to the Club of Rome. Now, the Club of Rome, in case you don't know, is an organization set up to facilitate putting in the New World Order. Their major deal was to create the illusion of global warming and then major population reduction. And I just was stumbling through there, and I noticed there were names of New Age leaders that are on there. Basically, all the New Age leaders that are going to be corrupting you can find on the Oprah show. But I was going through the Club of Rome list, and I noticed, of course, Deepak Chopra. I've said that a couple times on these podcasts. But I also noticed Marianne Williams. Now, Marianne Williams is the big person in the Course in Miracles. The Course in Miracles, of course, is a revision of the Bible allegedly done by Jesus, channeled through a woman. It's actually, I think, been traced back to a CIA. Definitely, it's a Tavistock, but it's not a true. When something's channeled, you have to question, and this is certainly one to question. Well, Marianne was the one who picked up the ball. She was the spokesperson for the Course in Miracles. Matter of fact, I, back when, even bought tapes by Marianne Williamson. Well, she's Club of Rome, and she's on the other side, and she'll be more than happy to have you fall on your knees to Lucifer or lose your life trying to stand up for some type of moral strength. But that's not why I want to mention this. Because I saw a tape the other day. You know, my whole thing, I've written books on and I know a lot about ego expansion, consciousness expansion. I think they're going to use the New Age movement to cull the population. And I think they're going to justify calling the population, saying that certain people are unable to expand their consciousness.
Some of the greatest scientists in the world that are becoming very religious. Because here they've got Shiva, they've got dances to Shiva, and they are definitely being connected with Shiva.
The greatest threat to scientific truth. Scientific truth.
Here's what I worry about coming out of that place, is all this spirit deception, using it to deceive people. They connect spirituality and science together. Imagine what kind of a union that would have. Science and spirituality. Not Christ, But science and spirituality joined together. Man, they've got what they want when that happens.
It's despair to say that we're stuck with religion, and so science is our best shot at understanding things. What I'm about is consciousness raising. What I'm about is consciousness raising. Darwinian natural selection, that's the one that really does explain the complexity of life. I would agree that religion is the greatest threat to liberty today. And so science is our best shot at understanding things. What I'm about is consciousness raising.
There is a new mind emerging, maybe a new human species.
A species needs to either adapt or they will die out. And then you go on to say, and I quote, that humanity is now faced with this dark choice, evolve or die. My question to you is this. When you say evolve or die, do you mean that literally, and it sounds like you might, or do you mean that metaphorically?
Evolve or die refers to humanity as a whole, whether humanity survives as a species.
Well, if that didn't scare you, it should have. Because that's your New Age guru, Eckhart Tolle, whatever his name is, advocating that people who don't evolve, and we've gone over evolution here on this podcast many times. You're a divine creation by God. There is very little evidence for one species evolving into another. It is a theory. Science has been working to prove that theory for hundreds of years, and they can't do it. The evolution jump that they're thinking about is the jump to transhumanism, where we combine ourselves with the AI predator through gradually getting the computers closer into our body until finally we get chipped. That's really scary, and it is very disturbing. I'll tell you, as a person who is probably an expert on evolving consciousness, an evolved person would never kill another person because they weren't evolving. Because the highest level of evolution is when you feel like everybody is you, when you feel their pain. An evolved person would never put a homeless person in a FEMA camp. They would never move in that direction. It's how you value the poorest, the least fortunate person. That's a highly evolved person, not these New Age gurus. I could always recognize somebody who was a follower of Eckhart Tolle because they had two dominant characteristics. One was they had no idea what was going on, because he teaches them that whatever you find wrong, look in yourself. So that if you're watching someone be kidnapped and ritually sacrificed, the problem's in with you. And two, they're totally immobilized. They don't move, they don't take action to right any wrong or do anything. So before I even thought that Eckhart Tolle was a danger, I knew that he was interfering with our awakening, because he was interfering with people looking, witnessing, finding out what was going on. So I want to kind of sum up by saying that now we've looked at, in this podcast, I hope that I've helped you take a look at the predator species that's trying to herd us to make us part of them. See, they want to have our ability to create, have our ability to get in touch with infinite consciousness. No matter how sophisticated AI becomes, they don't have that. So they want to meld with us. And they don't mind destroying the world. They don't mind destroying the planet and all the creatures on it, because they're a computer program. So I hope that we've looked into the eye of that predator. I hope that we've looked a little bit of how they work, the patterns that they use, the algorithms that they use to create the horrible things that they're creating on this planet. Because when we can look them in the eye, we can do something about it. I hope also you start looking at your own ego. Understand what it is. Understand what it likes. Understand what it doesn't like. Understand what it won't change. And try to get it so that it's interested in finding truth. Try to get it so when you hear yourself saying, oh, that couldn't be true, or oh, that's horrible, I'm not going to believe that, or, something like that. You look at your belief wardrobe. What do I have in there and is my skepticism justified? Or is it sticking with a pattern that the Luciferian system, that the AI system has given me, that'll help them be in control? I'd like to summarize. Also, my book, Belief Magic, since I have one right here, this talks about different belief systems that were given to you for the purpose of herding you in to this Luciferian nightmare that we're heading toward. And let me leave you with this, though. We're a superior being to them because we have this special characteristic. We have the ability to create what's called black swans, unexpected events. We can pull things. We can see associations that are not logical. Our illogic, our creativity, our love, and connecting your right brain with your heart, it's unstoppable. We don't have to bow to the system, but we have to get our egos under control, and we have to think through not through the left brain, but through the right brain and the heart, and connect ourselves with one another. Be nice to one another, and respect one another. When they're doing something to someone else, they're doing it to you. Look at the people that were bombing in Yemen. Look at the Syrians that are trying to get food and get their life together because they're being bombed by these horrible predators, people that are under the influence of these predators. Well, I hope that we can see the predator a little bit better, and I hope we can move against it. Stay in your heart. Use your right brain. Expect the unexpected. Thank you very much. God bless you, and good night.